Hello and welcome to another episode of Collective Conversations, a multifamily collective interview series. I'm joined today by David Staley, co-founder and president, and Reid Wicoff, co-founder and CEO of Digible, otherwise affectionately known as the Digible Dudes, which I very much love. David and Reid, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Excited to be here.
I'm glad. I'm very excited to do this interview. I know you guys have a podcast called Digible Dudes. I like your newest, whatever those call the avatar. You changed your picture recently, I noticed. But I love your podcast. I've listened to several episodes. I've heard everything from sort of pithy back and forth biting at each other to really deep and intelligent conversation as it relates to what's going on in the industry and otherwise. But I'm excited to do this if you guys are.
Yeah, totally. Well, also, I learned my fun fact of the day. Did you see that we updated our podcast?
No.
We look great.
I was going to say that's not what we typically pay attention to. So
Yeah.
Thanks for alerting us to that, Mike.
Yeah.
You heard it here first.
I'll take it. Looks good.
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, hey, I normally don't do any prep, but I did scour your website today. I printed off your LinkedIn resumes just so I know a little bit about you. But the Manifestus is the thing that caught my eye. So whoever wants to take this, please kind of tell me what the Manifestus is. And is that a real word?
No, it's not, which I think I qualified in the little intro to it is don't look that word up. I just fused about us and a manifesto, and that's how you get Manifestus. And that in many ways I think embodies Digible as a whole, and certainly David and I and Nicole, our third co-founder. We have combined together to create something I feel is pretty unique, both in our products, our services, and our culture. It's just kind of this unique combination that we brought to each other. That is a big part of that story. But early on, when we were first getting the company going, I think some people leave room for it, some don't, as far as laying out that purpose. Why are you building a company? What are you trying to achieve? And so it's just really important to me. And I think it was also a lot of timing, as far as what was flowing out at that moment for me. But just, I've been in corporate for about 20 years, had a couple of opportunities that I didn't take to start a company or be a part of founding a company. And had 3 young kids and, a pretty good, secure paying job, when we started Digible. And so it was a huge decision for all of us, but I think it's fair to say maybe I had the most risk, and I just let it flow, as far as what I was feeling, what I felt was capturing David and Nicole's sentiments on what we were trying to achieve, what we were trying to be about. And David tells a lot of folks as we onboard new employees, that Manifestus has not been changed or edited since we wrote it, and it's a kind of like our Constitution. It's been able to survive the test of time. Granted, it's just been 6 years, but it still really reflects who we are and what we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, I think you hit on a very important point there, and maybe Simon Sinek says this best. Once you understand the why behind what you're attempting to do, it's a whole lot easier to get engaged in it, whether it's you being engaged yourself or finding engagement in others, people that you work with and around, and certainly the clients that you serve. So I think it's, whether you call it a manifestus or you call it the reason we do business, I think that's important. So unpack, I read through the whole thing. I love it. There's a quote in there that says, "We are ready and willing to take on the toughest challenges in order to get the best result for our clients, but we're also happy to just hang out and enjoy one another's company and maybe a tasty beverage or two," which speaks to culture to me. So can you kind of just unpack the culture you've created there based on this manifestus and whatever you do in the daily doings?
Well, I'm going to let David actually jump on this one. I mean, we volley back and forth all the time, but I think he best reflects the core value curiosity out of the 5 that we have. And, as from the first minute I met David, he was just throwing all sorts of questions at me. I'm just trying to get to know me and just wanted to chat. And it's a great kind of characteristic that he has that has been a big part of our culture, our relationships. It's just that really deep native curiosity that he has. And so if you find him at a conference, it doesn't matter whether you're a COO, CEO, or whether you're just getting started in the industry as a property manager, there's a good chance that if you connect with him that he'll give you 30, 45 minutes just getting to know you. So I think you can jump into.
Oh, here's my first curiosity question, Reid. I was looking up, do you know when you wrote the Manifestus?
2017.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know much more than that.
Yeah, so I'll hit a few things here, Mike, that answer your question and tie with Reid's. But we started in April of 17. We had left our former employer where Reid, I, and Nicole had met at the Denver Post. Very quickly after we left, we did get tied up in a lawsuit with them, which we can talk about if we want. But we were basically just like fighting for our lives, basically through 2017 as we were going through the lawsuit and just handling all this legal stuff. We hired one employee basically going into December of 17. But Reid, you emailed me the Manifestus in on November 12th, 2017. So basically, like right after we closed up the lawsuit, right before we hired our first employee. And Mike, we hadn't even had we were able to pick a name, but we had never had a chance to talk. What is the vision of this company? What are the core values of this company? Any of that stuff. So Reid just had, one weekend sent this over to Nicole and I, and immediately for me, it just connected and gave me goosebumps. Like, okay, this is kind of that vision statement. And without that, what many companies do is they start a culture, and it's just by accident that they have a culture, and then it gets really messy because it's not well defined. So this was perfect for us going into hiring our first employee to have this, like, okay, this is our guiding, core values, if you will, / culture. And then to take that from there and say, okay, now we've beat the 800-pound gorilla, meaning we lived through it. So that's how we beat it. And then now we have decided that we're picking multifamily, and we started targeting multifamily. And it was, right about Christmas of that year where we got our first portfolio that then basically gave us hope that we could, survive, because we had just about been drained out on our finances. So anyways, I sort of hit your curiosity, Reid, but I also hit Mike's thing and how then that takes into culture.
Well, the willingness to just sit and chat, I think if you can expand on that a little bit, and I know you don't like bragging on yourself, but David has in many ways become the face of Digible, even though we have the dudes. He's spent the most time, I think, building up a network within the industry, and he's gotten there not just because of his curiosity, but he's got great intellect, which anybody that listens to this show knows, and great knowledge. But he just does love having conversation, and it's part of how he's grown his own knowledge, grown our knowledge. So I don't know if you can speak to where that all is rooted, but what it's meant, as you've gone through the last 6 years in multifamily, getting to know people just with that very casual, hey, let's just chat.
Yeah, well, so Mike, I hope I don't blow up your spot, but Mike was saying to us ahead of time that he's a huge introvert, and that this, podcast of his helps him, break through that. That's the same for me. I'm a huge introvert. I am typically naturally shy, even though many of our employees probably don't realize that. And I really dislike small talk. Small talk drives me bonkers. Reid does know this, because it's like, don't talk to me about weather or sports. Like, unless it's like something in depth. And so I basically, in my mid 20s was like, screw it. I'm not doing small talk when I go to these, Fordham events or whatever. I am just going to I'm going to poke pretty deep, and that throws people off, but it keeps it at least entertaining for me. Because if I don't get to do that and I have to go talk about the weather or something, I will not enjoy it. And so then I won't be there. And so now I've just found my way of being able to, as I view it, just get deeper and getting to something meaningful. And I try to take every conversation with anybody as if, let me learn something, so that I at least got value out of this. And it wasn't just, a plate of nachos or something and just killing 30 minutes.
I'm laughing because it's the deep conversation versus the chit chat. I chit chat is like dying 1,000 deaths to me, and it's because I do want to go deeper. I do want to understand origins and motives and inspiration, things of that nature. So wow, I'm glad to learn that about you. Maybe we'll have a deep conversation later.
Yeah, well, maybe some of it on this. I will say it backfires for me a little bit on employee interviews, because sometimes people think I'm I'm just almost too pointed because I'm like digging at something. I'm trying to get something out of it versus the surface level, like, what is your greatest weakness? I try too hard. I don't accept those answers. I will like push them, and that can be off-putting. So I have, I'm still sometimes testing different things out with my interview skills of how can I interview someone, be super interested without, popping their balloon, I guess, in that process.
Yeah, that makes sense. I am interested. So obviously, we both serve the multifamily space, obviously in different roles. But why multifamily? There's all kinds of industry out there. You leave the Denver Post, but you end up serving the multifamily space.
Yeah, well, I was the SVP of sales and marketing at the Post. David was on the enterprise sales team for digital. So he was selling across the country in all the kind of major categories, not just real estate, but that was one of them. Nicole, our third co-founder, was over digital operations, kind of the client services and actually fulfillment of ad campaigns, digital ad campaigns. And David, I think it's fair to say, stumbled across a couple of opportunities with one of the largest property management companies in the industry from another rep who was like, these are small budgets, not really interested, and handed them off to David to see if he wanted to run with them. And it didn't take him long to see much bigger opportunity, kind of this franchise model, if you will, where it's like, there's more than a couple properties here, there's hundreds. And if I can crack this nut, it could become something that's really scalable. And so he took off with it. I was kind of watching it first from 30,000 feet, seeing this revenue line just go up and up and up. And he and I at that point were starting to build a relationship, but I wasn't spending an inordinate amount of time with him. But I knew he had something, but both himself as well as like what I was seeing with the multifamily, business growing. And so the more that it grew, the more that we did spend time together, started having some late night conversations about, bigger ideas. And eventually that led to me approaching him. I didn't get on one knee, but I called him into my office and, said, hey, what do you think about actually giving this a run and starting our own business? And David, didn't take him long to say yes. He had already done a couple startups, but we both saw a big opportunity and really had enjoyed a lot of the conversations leading up to that. So we felt we could give it a go.
That makes sense. I want to take one step back. I appreciate that story. You got in a lawsuit immediately upon starting a business. My imagination tells me, I mean, you remarked that you almost drained all of your resources, but the the fight, the grit, the perseverance I imagine you had to exercise to get through that. Can you just tell our listeners a little bit about, like, I'm just thinking somewhere out there there is a person or people who are sitting on a fence and just like, oh my God, I got to make payroll tomorrow. I imagine you had those same conversations with yourself. So love to hear about that.
Yeah. Well, when Reed talked to me about doing it, we were like, well, how are we going to do this and how are we going to do it, ethically, meaning we can't pre-build this business. So one of us needs to leave first. And I, had no attachments. Reed has 3 daughters. And so it was like, okay, maybe David will go first and launch this thing. So I was trying to save up some money so that I could leave and have maybe, like, let's say 6 or 9 months of cash resources. Well, I built it, and then, maybe Reed would come over later. What ended up happening was they had gotten wind of us having conversations about starting a company, but we had not started a company. I didn't have a ton saved up yet. I had just bought my house, so I had put a down payment on a house, had just a little bit in savings, and then they approached us and said, hey, we're going to need you guys to sign your life away, basically, like, where you basically we would be, I mean, it was a pretty harsh non-compete. And so Reed was like, I'm not going to do that. And I still want to go do this thing. How about you, David? And I said, sure. So on one hand, I think we had maybe been talking about it for a year or maybe just over a year before that happened. But I did have something in the back of my mind, like, are we going to do this? Because how could he leave the great position he's in when he has his family to support? And this gave us no choice. It was like either Reed can sign or all of us sign this non-compete. And basically now we're stuck here. Or we can go and give this thing a shot. So I kind of appreciate the kick in the butt it gave us to get out the door. And then once we got out the door, we're like, okay, well, we don't have the savings. We wanted to get this thing started. We don't even know the name of the company. Like we got to like have a brainstorm session, come up with a name, buy a website, like do all that stuff. And we had just bought the website, and it was like, was it the day after we incorporated?
Yeah, it was 3 days.
3 days. So basically we left on Friday. Over the weekend, we come up with a name. I bought the URL, like $2,500 on a credit card because I, again, didn't have a ton of savings. Then we incorporate on Monday. Then by Wednesday, they sue us and they serve us paperwork. And so that then started that fight of like, and we had an injunction put against us from the courts because they're like, we don't know what happened here. So you guys can't basically do business until we like work this out. And so that, that whole thing cost us 6 months and six figures basically to work out. And then once it worked out, then we're like, well, now by then we'd had enough conversations to say, let's focus on multifamily. Let's lean into this. We had started development on our tech, Fiona. So I don't think we did this yet, but Digible is both a marketing services company, so lead generation, and then we have a tech as well. That's think of it like revenue management, but for your marketing dollars. So how much to spend, where to spend it. And so we were just all in at that point and hoped that we could find enough customers to generate enough cash flow to keep us afloat, to both build the tech and the service side.
Yeah, he's leaving out not a insignificant part of that experience, I'll say, for us was seeing our names in the paper, seeing them online, kind of dragged through the mud. So that was very difficult for all three of us. I do think we all have high integrity and character. And so, my dad, as he put it to me when I was talking through with him, he's like, don't ever fight or pick a fight with a company that buys ink by the barrel. And yeah, that was like, thanks, but no thanks, Dad. Like,
I'm already in a fight.
yeah,
Sorry.
I'm already stuck here. So appreciate the sage advice. But yeah, they really, made a big effort to, I think, kind of, I don't want to say intimidate, but I won't avoid it, from really starting the company. So it wasn't just a matter of a legal entanglement and financial. There was some other things going on there that really challenged our mental psyche, our fortitude, our grit. And there was some really long nights. I mean, from my wife, crying herself to sleep, wondering if we were going to keep the house. Just all the things that we had worked so hard for were at risk, real risk. And so yeah, we threw kind of a Hail Mary after the 6 months. We were running out of money, and we were trying to find a way to settle the thing. And fortunately, you could say it was caught. We got to the table, spent several hours downtown going back and forth until we figured it out. But then at that point, it's like we have no money now. We still have some limitations that were put as part of the settlement on who we could, actually go pitch. And so there was still a lot up in the air. And we chose in the middle of all that not to go VC, which might sound completely crazy, but we refused to take money through all of that. We said one of the things we knew if we started this company is we wanted to bootstrap it. So that meant David's savings depleted, mine depleted, Nicole, everything. Everything was at risk. 401k, yeah, everything. And yeah, 6 months into it, not a dime, not one customer. So it was very, I guess, just, fate that a couple of clients that were several degrees removed, I'll say, from where they needed to be removed, had reached out to David that were from multifamily and said, hey, we'd love to work with you on this project, had heard your name, got your name, and would love your advice. And that's what started it. We got a few properties. I remember going to the mailbox daily, just looking for one check to come in, hoping that, we would get paid. And then at the end of the year, I don't know if we ever fully tracked that down, but we had a large student housing portfolio that came to us right around Christmas of 2017 and said, hey, we have a portfolio we'd like you guys to manage. And we had 4 employees and really weren't totally sure how we were going to fulfill all that business. But that was it. that was the catalyst really for Digible. Is that the end of that year when that portfolio came in, we both kind of looked at each other and we're like, it's game on. We can do this now. And so we did good work on that and started building up and building up. We went from 3 employees to, I think, 10 to 15 by the end of the next year, and then to 25, then to 50, then to 60. And, right now we're closing in on 90 employees 6 years later, and been able to do it on our own steam.
Gosh, that's I mean, what I have coming to mind for me is that burn the ship mentality, right? You pull up to the island and the captain burns the ship, and you have no choice but to make it. And I have to imagine that emotionally loaded circumstance like baked some things into the DNA of your company. Is that how would you express what you are today as a function of this incredible start? What is hung around as a driving force for your company based on that start?
Well, I think the curiosity we mentioned, David stayed curious through all that. I did some days, and some days maybe not as much. But that's definitely hung around. We expect people to ask a lot of questions. We think that's so critical, to finding success, development, growth, and then passion probably is. It is grit, but we feel it's so important. If you're going to find happiness, be successful in your career and in your life, you really have to have passion for what you're doing. And so I think when people walk into our office, whether it's somebody interviewing or whether it's a client or a vendor, that's something they always comment on. It's like, man, there's so much energy in here. There's just this electricity when you walk in that door. And I think that was their day one. That's been Digible's magic. Is we really genuinely love talking about this stuff, what we do, being together, trying to move the ball down the field, for the whole industry, really. That's a big part of our purpose. And we love our employees. And that's pervasive, and that's definitely been persistent and pervasive. So that's what you still feel from, I think, the first few
Me,
months.
I think it's the authenticity. So like, no matter, like, even though we disagree with what was characterized online and in the lawsuit and the way we were portrayed, it was important to us to stay true to ourselves and who we were. And it was also important to us, like I told you a little bit before we started, Mike, but in the early going, when it was the three of us and we're getting sued, and if you Google Reed's name, my name, or our company's name, the number one thing that shows up is this lawsuit and what we've been accused of. And we were like, well, shoot, man. Now when I'm emailing people trying to cold call them or if they try to look us up on LinkedIn, what are they going to see but that? And then it's like, well, on LinkedIn, shouldn't they see more than 3 people? Like, do we need to like invent like 40 or 50 people here so that it looks like we're bigger than we are? And we decided not to do that. And one of the problems I had at our last company was I had 3 different business cards. And so it was like, depending on who I was talking to, I was representing a different company. And that always made me feel very awkward. I hated the taste of it, blah, blah, blah. So when starting Digible, and Reid was like, authenticity is going to be one of our important things. I'm like, great. I'm not going to hide from it. When someone says, hey, aren't you in that lawsuit, or aren't you? It's like, we'll just tell them what it is. There's no sugarcoating. It's just, this is us. And then,
but you didn't use the phrase "guilty as charged."
definitely not using that phrase. And then I would say that held through with many things. So it's like, we want to do things that entertain ourselves as well. So if you call our office line and you get to the voicemail on it, like we hired a British woman to do the voicemail because we thought it was funny and that it would sound smart. And so we just did all these little things that kept us entertained to get through some of this emotional wreckage. And then and I would say that stayed. So anybody that comes here, we tell them, like, bring your full self to work. Like, and when you're asking a team member, like, hey, you don't seem, your energy seems off today. Is it something, about the company that we can do something about, or something at home and you just need some space? We encourage them to bring that full self to work and don't feel like they have to put on a button up shirt if that's not what they wear at home. So it's not just like casual for casual sake. It's more of like, just be who you are when you show up.
That's so fantastic. It's I've thought for a long bit of time that there is no magic coat hanger that sits right outside of your front door, right? That you're supposed to hang your problems on before you cross the threshold to come in to do business, right? You need to leave that coat on, bring it in, and the fact that you invite it and you acknowledge it and you ask about it. To me, it goes back to the word you used just a second ago, love. I mean, when you love people and you truly love them in the true sense of that word, my imagination tells me that you inspire a level of commitment in your organization that you wouldn't otherwise see if you didn't have that, right? You've created a
Well,
psychologically safe environment for people to come and be themselves.
yeah, and I'd say something I got probably the most personal satisfaction from, but it's the closest you could say to us sticking it back to our former employers. There was plenty of opportunities, and there still is even now. We definitely get asked about it, and even with some media, you know, about what happened. Are we bitter? Are we angry? And there's some of that, but most of that has left me and left pretty early, and it needed to in order for us to have room and space for us to focus on the business and not be stomping our feet or angry at how we were portrayed and all that stuff. But you mentioned your imagination of the culture and what that feels like here. When we were, I think it was 2020 pandemic may have been the year that happened, but we became eligible for top workplaces, which is actually produced by the Denver Post. A lot of the major papers will do this, and I used to be responsible for the revenue targets for that. But it was pretty sweet because once you get to 50 employees, you're eligible. So we went ahead and applied, and it's all employee-based feedback. And lo and behold, we were the number one top workplace in Colorado for employers 50 to 200. So I did get a little satisfaction out of watching the editor read our name off as the top place to work in Colorado.
And best new ideas.
Yeah, best new ideas
for the entire state of Colorado.
Yeah, and there was a third one too that we kind of cleaned house on the awards, and we've been a top workplace every year since. So that we're trying not to be petty or anything, but that one was fun. So yeah, I think we do have a great culture, and that award certainly I think illustrates it.
That's gold. That's
Yeah,
absolutely
pretty fun.
So you have this incredible culture. I I want to say I'm taking a little bit of a left turn here, or maybe a hard right. I was first turned on to your podcast. I can't remember. Let's say it was like episode 80, 90. I don't know. But there was something that one of you said that I thought was pretty profound for somebody that doesn't do what you do on a daily basis. I was like, oh yeah, that makes. So you were talking about, it was around the holidays. That's what it was. And it was right around Thanksgiving or leading into Thanksgiving and Christmas. You put on an episode. The remark that you made was, hey, by the way, everybody in your neighborhood is going to they're going to be bidding on the same keywords that you would be bidding on. So the price is going to be like off the charts. So let's say this was like September, October. You're like, do it now, whatever you're going to do now to get yourself prepared for that. So use that as a jumping off point for like what Digible does for the multifamily space. And I know Fiona is another piece of this, but maybe we start with the first piece of that.
Yeah, well, we've always been performance marketers. Well, I shouldn't say that. Some of Reed's background, he spent some time in radio and some other stuff, but he definitely has been more data driven. And same for me. Like I struggle. I had always struggled with like, okay, is my marketing working or not working? So performance marketers is really our nature. So we do a lot of lead generation. So that would be paid search or paid social or any other sort of paid media. And that service set has expanded over the years to like SEO and now websites and so on and so forth. But what there's a few things we're huge fans of Jim Collins, who wrote Good to Great and Built to Last, and we love his concept of a smack recipe. So what are the things you're always going to do or always not going to do? And one of the issues that we always saw in multifamily is all of these vendors tying you into 12-month agreements, and basically you take your budget and you say, great, it's $144,000, divide it by 12 months. So that's $12,000 a month. And that's what I'm spending. Yet your rent roll obviously doesn't work like that, right? It's not an even, I churn 10 units a month or what have you. So for us, it was important to not have contracts and allow people to just up and down their budget by need. And that's what Fiona was based on. But that's also like to your point about pay-per-click when it's like when to spend your dollars, because people searching for apartments don't search, only 100 searches a day, right? It's like there's a real volatility to it. And going into the holidays, to your point, like you'll see a lot of searches up until the week of Thanksgiving, and then you see like nothing. And then right at the week after Thanksgiving, it will double the search volume. People are like, "Oh shoot, I better try to find something before Christmas." And then of course it goes dark on the last like 10 days of the month, and then January 2nd, so right after the new year, you see searches double again. And so you have to just be careful, like on not only annually match your budget to your rent roll, but also seasonally, to where, people, when they are searching, and what your competitors might do if they're using someone that's not apartment based, is they try to spend the same amount every day, always, no matter what the cost of that search is. Like one day it's $1, another day it's $2. For us, we've now been gathering that data for 10,000 zip codes. So every zip code in the country, we've gathered that data for every month for the last 5.5 years. And so we can see what these seasonal, changes are going to be by zip code. And then, like, okay, based on search volume, blah, 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 cost is going to go up, cost is going to go down. And then that's how you can set your bid. So there are times when you want your competitors to just sort of like blow it out, like let them waste all their dollars. And then you come in behind and mop up. So yeah, it's just more of, you need to trust whoever you're working with to do this stuff, because Mike can't do that for every property in his portfolio. And it's not, you just, by human, you could not execute on it anyways, and you shouldn't be the expert. You need to just trust that someone else is doing it for you.
I'd just add that it's amazing how formulaic like the strategy can and probably should be when it comes to your multifamily marketing and advertising, that people just either don't know or don't understand or don't have the time to get to. But I think of it as a chess game. All the things David just described, it's like when you move your piece here, then I'm going to move my piece there. And there's certainly a lot of nuances and complexities around that, but some of the kind of the basic maneuvering that you should do is pretty formulaic and can make a big difference in how efficient your ad dollars are. One of our goals at Digible, we say this all the time, especially with some of the organic offerings. So we do paid media, but we also offer SEO, as well as organic social to our clients. But it's to make the operator's money work smarter, not harder. And in this industry, one of the biggest shifts that's happened is the move from ILSs to digital advertising. So we've been seeing that for the last 10 years, and it's probably at its peak right now. There's still a lot of companies that are putting 50% to apartments.com, Zillow, Zumper, but more and more you're seeing those dollars get more prescriptive, and they're tapping into digital advertising, but they're still new to it. And so they don't necessarily get, again, kind of the basics that can make a huge difference in that cost per lead or cost per acquisition. And so that's ultimately our mission. That's how we go to market. We say, it may end up that right now you're spending 2,000 in search, and if we're successful with this strategy, you'll be spending half that in 6 to 12 months. And that's something else that I think is pretty unique. And this isn't meant in any way to be a pitch for Digible, but we are very comfortable with budgets going up and down. We built the business that way. Most companies don't do that, where it's like once they start to hit a certain trajectory, they're terrified of anything that might sacrifice or cost those trends to go the other direction. But if we're really going to practice what we preach and say it really does depend on your rent roll, it does depend on all these dynamics as far as who's spending, when they're spending, then you should actually see more of an EKG, like, an up and down heartbeat to your budget. But what prevents a lot of digital agencies and those ILSs from ever taking that approach is they weren't built, like the economics weren't built that way. Not to mention, of course, some of the other pressures they may feel from shareholders or, investors and things like that. But that's won us a lot of business where people know, hey, I actually am leased up here. Digible may be recommending that I take my budget down the back half of the year.
And to that point, we don't have a sales team, and nobody is commissioned or bonused based on anything. And that's by nature, because if you have a sales team, they're not going to exactly want to like recommend someone pulls budget back down. And then to that point, like we do still recommend the ILS to people. We just are we are prescriptive about the ILS and how they use it. So don't get locked into the diamond package necessarily, because now it's for 12 months. Like, start lower and then throttle up, throttle down, or throttle with your paid media or something. So for us, we want our client services folks to be the trusted advisor. And many times being the trusted advisor is telling people to pull back on their budget. And historically, when we've looked at a set of properties, on average, most third-party management companies are overspending by about 30%. And it's because they're taking that 12-month budget and they're taking that budget divide by 12. And with the seasonality, when you look at it, they're just wasting. There's 30% of that budget that they could save if they were being more variable with the spend, as Reid was mentioning.
Yeah, that makes. I mean, and what owners, in terms of building trust with a client, if you're recommending to receive less dollars, I can't imagine a better sort of a tactic to gain trust with a client, right?
The second best tactic is probably the fact David briefly mentioned, but we'll recommend ILS even though we don't support that. So one is, yes, we might tell you to spend less money, and two, we might tell you to spend it somewhere else other than Digible.
Yeah.
Because we still believe in the ILS. It's just, I always liken the ILS to Match.com. It's like, if you buy these diamond packages and all that stuff, it's like saying, I want to, if you're, I guess,
I'll date anybody.
A woman, yeah, I want a 6 foot tall male. It's like you're going to get all sorts of leads, right? Or matches. But that probably isn't going to be the best match. And so we say the same thing when it comes to your ILS strategy. It's like, actually, the more qualifiers, and in some ways you could say harder it is to find you, the better, because that will ensure that when you do get a lead, it's a very, very good lead versus, just kind of the fire engine. But for lease ups, a lot of them are okay with that. We qualify that. They say, I understand that. Right now, I'm not worried about fatiguing my leasing agents. They just need to prepare. We are going to turn on that fire hose, and we accept that. But when you're getting into more stabilized position, then that's when we say you need to be thinking very differently about your ILS strategy.
That makes sense. I want to shift a little bit, a lot. So OpenAI, it's the big buzz, right? Chat GPT. These are not my novel thoughts. I'm just curious your thoughts. So at some point, this OpenAI or AI in general impacts the way that we search today, right? Search behavior may change as a result of this thing being introduced into the ecosystem. One version of that I've heard is, hey, I have a co-pilot who now understands who I am as a person, my behaviors out in the online world. And if I'm looking for an apartment, it will go out and actually do that potentially on my behalf. And whatever yields to my co-pilot won't necessarily look like a bunch of links, right? That we've traditionally been programmed to receive. It's rather going to be, here are your options, right? How do you think about a apartment community yielding in a new sort of search world, not this traditional search world that we know today? Does that make sense? I'm probably not articulating that very well, but I think search looks different in the future. And I'm just wondering how you stay relevant in that new search environment.
Yeah, I think that as it exists today, there's not going to be a big difference, because as it exists today, the way I view the Bing partnership with OpenAI is that it's answering sort of those like typical like, can dogs eat oranges kind of questions. Yeah, it's not these like intent-based searches. I need to like yada yada. Now, Reid is on many of our podcasts has talked about like, oh, when will there be a virtual assistant where Reid can say, hey, me, what apartment should I go tour? So maybe there's a world like that, like let's say 10 years from now, but in the short term, I don't think that's going to be an issue. I do believe like in the long term, the faster you can modernize and get more and more of information about your property, the better someone can make a choice. So we've seen this like content is one of the most under leveraged things in multifamily. And a lot of that is because most multifamily folks have 1 or 2% of their budget go to advertising. And of that 1 or 2%, there's not a lot of room there for content. So I know Reid's passionate about using, NLG to produce content, which is something Digible has been doing for 4.5 years now. But I think the faster you can get on online and get as much information out about your property, the better. Because then those systems can start to pick up, information about it. So there are very simple things that most properties under leverage. So a very easy one is if you look at the keyword like apartments for rent Denver with a Tesla charging station, there's like two options. But yet there are way more than two apartment buildings that have Tesla charging stations. They just aren't even putting their data like, up online for people to even get it. So if you can just get get your schema together, put all the information out there, because some people won't buy an apartment or won't rent an apartment if it doesn't have the Tesla station, and they're not going to even go tour or call you to ask if it has it. They're going to look at those two options and say, wow, pickings are slim. I guess I got these two. I better go take a tour.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I've been listening to a lot lately and reading a lot lately, in the impact. Certainly, a lot of this is like lick your finger, wave it in the sky speculation that's going to happen. But I just have to imagine that it's it's shifting the way consumers behave as it relates to how we search for apartment or search for anything, frankly. And trying to stay ahead of that is going to be key, in my opinion, on a go forward.
Yeah, I totally agree. I do think it's going to turn things upside down, like with search, but I also agree with David. It won't be overnight. And I think most people understand that. But, there is the Chat GPT 4, and, I think it's the CEO already talking about 5, but, this is, this isn't the same as the internet and the time period that technology takes, for the consumers or consumers at large to adopt. We are starting to change generations or turning over so that, I'll use my own daughters, like their appetite or willingness for change is very different than mine. And so I think that the adoption rate of a new transformative, technology like GPT, we'd be naive to think is going to be on the same kind of protracted timeline that the internet was. Everything is moving faster. And so with that, I think Google, not that it's all about them, obviously, but needs to be thinking, and I know they already are, about how they're going to account for this, because they won't be able to, I'll say, manipulate the search results the way that they had in the past, specifically on the paid side. They don't make money on organic. They never have. And you can see the amount of real estate and the modifications on Google over the last 10 years. If you were to look at a time lapse video of that, it has been all about the paid. They need to make sure that, that model stays, you know, viable for them. And so if what you're describing, which I fully agree with, happens and people are able to just, put in certain inputs and also through their own web, browsing history, other content, all the mechanisms that, that's feeding, the Chat GPT, where is the business model for Google? Because they're not going to turn that themselves into a license fee. It sounds like David's,
Yeah, well, where I'm going is I think it's more, meaning I agree with you, but we also have seen that Google, any of these out of industry players don't focus on apartments, even though it's a huge industry. They focus on what they focus on. They'd rather do automotive first. So what I think there's more of an opportunity here for a vendor to come in and like shake things up. So the traditional ILS is like, I don't agree with their sponsorship model, where it's like, let's buy a diamond package and it's always $2,500 a month forever. And, but you see other models like Apartment List, like, sort of some people love them, some people hate them. The hate comes more from the lead fatigue than it comes from like necessarily, oh, am I going to settle up on this individual lease? So some player like that, I think, could come in and they should be thinking, how can we leverage this? So back to my example about Tesla charging stations. Um, if you're apartments.com, like maybe you'll add that amenity on there for people to search, but you're not super incentivized to be like, let me like lean into Chat GPT or what's going to be the Google competitor and make sure that someone can come in sideways and find your thing, because you're selling purely based on, don't you want to be number one? Not, do you want the sideways traffic, right? And so an Apartment List where it's more of this leasing assistant, right? Almost like an apartment broker or something like that to me, I think there's real legs on, because look, I love my privacy. It's why I live on the top of a mountain in a log cabin. I do not want people whatever. I'm introverted, I said, Mike, but
/ paranoid.
yeah. However, if I was renting an apartment today, even like we're mildly looking at houses, I would share my past Google location history. And if you ask me 1 to 5, do you want to be near trails? 5, like all day long. Do you want to be next to a Walmart or a strip center or whatever? 1. I don't give a damn. And then if that assistant could come back and be like, you should totally look at these 3 neighborhoods, or you should totally tour these half dozen apartments based on everywhere you go to hit your trails or whatever, I would be all over that. But if you're apartments.com, you don't get to monetize that, just like Google doesn't get to monetize, as Reid was saying, based on the current business model. So if you're apartment list or one of these other players, that's what I lean into, is like, how can we now tell our story that we are like similar to like we're voice enabled, kind of story. I would be like moving hard in that direction of like painting some sizzle piece for it.
Do you think that at point, what came to mind for me as you were walking through that is like the airline model or the airline or hotel model, where in the past you do that Google search and you had to go to that website to do that transaction. Now it's like you can do the transaction right there on the Google yield page, right? It yields the result and you can actually do the transaction. Is there an apartment version of that where you're doing that transaction in the search result and Google's new share is a piece of that transaction, right? If I rent
Well, I
an
think
apartment.
that's the dream, but Google has, like, we've heard murmurs from our contacts in the organization where they've sort of tested ideas like that for years, but they've never launched. And I think it just keeps coming back down to it's a smaller market for them compared to airlines. Like they bought, I forget what but they bought the tech that basically aggregated all of the flight times and stuff. And then that's why, like, because they bought the source of it. So yeah, I guess if Google bought CoStar or someone that has all the inventory feed, that maybe they could go that way. But as it stands today, they've just shown time and time again they're focused on other things. And as you probably heard, they had like a all hands code red because of OpenAI. So it's like they sure as hell aren't focusing on apartments right now. It's just like Facebook Marketplace or Facebook Meta walking away from Facebook Marketplace with apartments. Like you can basically Craigslist your stuff on there right now, but you can't send a feed over there. So Reid, I do want to give you a chance on this one, but I just don't see that happening with Google. So I view it more of, if you're in the chat, if you're using your chat assistant, maybe there's a plugin from Apartment List or Zumper or something that allows you to like do this sort of thing that I was talking about.
Yeah, I think they are distracted right now with other things. So that could delay what might have been, a move into real estate. I don't know if I fully agree with David as far as, is the monetary, gains. They're the way they are for like the airline industry, like for travel. Real estate's obviously a mega category, and you're talking about, in most cases, a lot higher dollar amounts when people are choosing their home, even if it is an apartment. That being said, I very much agree with him as far as like the CoStar, like the acquisition that might be necessary. And if that happens, they might get the spotlight put back on them in a way that they're trying to avoid right now related to antitrust. It's like, there's all sorts of things happening, as we know, in DC, focused on this. And there's a real worry in the New York Times, Washington Post, as you mentioned, some of the articles you've read about ChatGPT are very nervous about how much power they will have in shifting and molding public opinion and having us make, decisions very subtly, that we probably wouldn't make otherwise if it weren't for that kind of technology. So I think, yeah, giant tech right now is in a very, precarious kind of position as they look towards the future. They know they need to innovate. There is some big disruptions, but they have to be careful not to get too aggressive because that could bring even more heat their way.
Yeah, that's fully fair. It's the business climate right now is more than interesting for everybody out there. So I want to switch gears. We're coming up on 50 minutes. I love to sort of think crystal ball, 3 to 5 years, 10 years, whatever. It's like you one of the things on your website is taking multifamily to the future. I'm interested in unpacking that beyond this moment in time. You are bringing a lot of people who have been laggards, but what do you see on the horizon that really would impact our industry in an interesting way?
Well, I'll tee up, David. I think one of the best examples of that, or what we see, is the dam finally breaking as it relates to integrations and data. So the collaboration that's been lacking, and frankly, that's not by coincidence, right? A lot of the big prop tech have been extremely effective, I'll say, in boxing out the startups, the secondary and tertiary kind of tech platforms. But I think that we're on the cusp, and when I say that, you said 3 to 5 years, so I think that's a fair timeline. But you're already seeing some examples of this, of up and coming, whether it's CRMs, PMSs, or marketing platforms that are not just getting swallowed up and forgotten about, but are able to keep their independence and start, building partnerships so that we can advance the industry past where it's at, and make use of all the data, cohesively, and kind of build that back up into a smart sound operating strategy, not just in the marketing realm. And David, for us has been that guy, so to speak, that's been knocking on doors, having those conversations, using his superpower of curiosity, but also, I think, generating some of that groundswell that the industry needs right now, as far as, hey, if we don't change it, who's going to? So let's start doing some partnerships, putting a little bit pressure upstream, and see if we can't get some of these bigger REITs or management companies to come with us on this venture. And that's how we're going to start to see real progress, because it does boil down to the data. It's only as valuable as the usage you get out of it. So if we're still talking about, we're having to pay $300,000 for that API, or those two systems don't talk to each other, the industry is in a bad spot. It will remain stagnant for the most part. So I don't know if you want to talk about mods.
Yeah, I just view that it's your data, so why can you not get it out of those systems? That's super aggravating. And if you look at ad tech, I did a presentation on this at our Digible Summit last year, but 10 years ago there were 140 ad tech companies, and now there are over 10,000 ad tech companies. And you have to be able to integrate your marketing stack, let alone your operations stack, with marketing. And one of the biggest, I guess, things to illustrate this is what we witness is that operations, which I think is your world, Mike, they're like, we need to get more leads. Let's go ahead and throw in a concession. And marketing is like, oh, shoot, we were told we need to get more leads. Let's double our marketing budget. Do you need to pull both ripcords at the same time? Probably not. They should talk, right? But they don't talk together right now. So that's the angle we're coming from, is like, let's start with small wins. Let's just connect your revenue management to your marketing. And then that way you can make a sound decision on, like, is there a better ROI from offering a concession, or a better ROI from, spending $1,000 more bucks on marketing, and which, is more controllable in a way. So as Reid was saying, we've been attacking this in our own way, and I just think that they're similar to how there's the oh my gosh, I'm totally blanking on the name. The feed that goes to the ILS, the MITS feed, like there needs to be the same thing, but just multifamily open data. Like there just needs to be an open data, schema that we all are allowed to share and can share, versus this is where I can get myself in trouble, but we pay for the APIs from the big players, and they quoted us just the other week, $300,000 is your new rate for this API, and yet the property management company is paying their own fee to access that data. Then each of the vendors, let's say every vendor is as big as Digible, they're all paying 300 grand. That's a huge moneymaker for them. Yet it definitely stifles the industry from innovation, from efficiencies. It's just there's a lot of OpEx waste because of that. Like imagine how much we could drop our fee if we didn't have to pay 300 grand, right? For just one of those APIs. And if the management company could actually own their data and then use it. So, don't get me started.
I think the second half of that isn't talked about as much, but I will say Digible, sees more probably in years, let's call it 4 to 7 than 1 to 3, in front of us, is we don't want to, like, I guess, create this movement. And I don't mean Digible alone, but I'm just saying the industry comes together, and let's say we start to find some success, knock some of those doors or barriers down, boundaries. And then what we find is we now have, this is pertinent for me, I'm going to use a relevant example, is the health tracker on my iWatch, where now I have 18 different integrations coming in. And it's like, that's great. Now all the data's there. I have no idea what to do and how to do it. So I think that's what we need to see from technology. It's like, first we need to knock down those boundaries and barriers so that the data can flow through and it is, all housed and available and actionable. But then there needs to be a platform that can actually operate, or you can operate with all that data. So for Digible, that is our, call it Moonshot, is a marketing operating system for multifamily. That's where we are taking Fiona. But we can't get there without, it's chicken and egg, without the data starting to open up. The integration's easier to get at. But then we want to create an interface, a platform that people can easily navigate and actually make use of all that, versus just a super bloated BI platform where it's like, now I can see everything. No clue what to do with it.
Yeah, exactly right. It's I've been doing this for nearly 30 years now, the operation side of multifamily, and there's nothing that makes me more crazy than the legacy players that have these walled gardens, and when they see a competitor, they either buy it up and rob it of resources, basically put it out of business, or they try to incorporate it into their own offering, and it ends up being a terrible offering. They can't even integrate when they buy the company.
Mm-hmm.
And it just makes me a crazy person, because I love this industry. I love it. The core of what our industry does, we're putting a roof over somebody's head and trying to create an experience that allows them to do other things in their life, right? And we could do that so much better if we would just break those walls down, to use your words, and free the data so that we can actually create a consumer experience that is just off the charts. But I'm looking forward to the day, and I believe it in my heart of hearts, that somebody's in a garage somewhere bolting this thing together, and it's going to come out of nowhere, and the legacy players are just they're not going to know what hit them when it happens, and I'm looking forward to that day.
Well, I think we both believe as well, and if you don't believe, then how's it ever going to happen? So, but somebody does have to build it, and we're going to try and do our part, especially on the marketing side. You should, since you've checked our podcasts out a few times, you search for the one on Aptly. I don't know Senna's last name, but amazing perspective, and it sounded like you were channeling your Senna, just talking about the industry, what's needed, and what's happening. His first company got acquired by RealPage, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he was very open, candid about his experience through that. What he learned, what he thinks is actually good about it, and certainly some of the same concerns that you expressed. But great guy, great perspective, and it was one of our favorite podcasts, I think. So
Mm-hmm.
I guess that's a shame. I guess that's a shameless plug for Digible Dudes.
Yeah, I'd encourage anybody to sign up to your podcast. I do love it, and I mean that genuinely.
Yeah,
I know a lot of people
appreciate
come
it.
on and say things like that, but I really do. Okay, we're roughly around an hour. I want to be respectful of your time. I know you have a hard stop, but I want to give you guys the last word, and certainly share where people can reach out to you and connect.
Yeah, I mean, you can find us pretty easily by just looking up whether it's David or Reid and Digible. We get a lot of joy out of these kind of conversations, as Reid was saying. So maybe I'll use that actually, instead of like plugging the company or anything, more about plugging guests for the podcast. So if anybody has suggestions of somebody that they think we should have on or interview, or a topic that you want us to hit, then definitely email hello@Digible. And let us know who we should be getting in touch with, because that's how we find joy every day right now, is just talking and meeting new people, learning new things, and trying to connect those dots, Mike. And some of those are data dots, and some of them are just dots. So
Yeah, definitely.
You
Excellent.
mentioned the comic strip. We didn't get to it. offline, but I do encourage people to check out our website. We got some fun stuff on there, as well as the multifamily comic strip, and we'll save that follow up maybe for another day. The background on that, but we even turned it into a game, Mike, and we handed it out, a card game. Based on that comic strip, and we handed it out at NAA last year, and it was a big hit. The card decks went like that. So we'll have to send you a deck. I think you get a kick out of it.
I love it. Speaking in NAA, you guys are going to come this year in Atlanta?
Yep, we'll be there.
You're right in our backyard. We'll be there. I'm actually setting up my podcast booth there, so I'd love to have you guys stop in. And we're trying to do like 10, 15-minute little what do you think about the conference so far, that kind of thing. So love to have you guys.
We're doing the same. So we'll have a podcast syndicate at NAA.
Love it.
Yeah.
I'll show you mine if you show me yours. Yeah. All right. Well, guys, it's been an absolute pleasure. I know we had some fits and starts trying to get this on the calendar, but I appreciate the time you've invested with us today. And yeah, I definitely want to have you back at some point. It'd be fun to kind of do a second round and get into the comic strip and some other things. So, all right.
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Mike.
All right. For everybody else, we'll see you next time on Collective Conversations.